Hi, Pavel. Thanks for making time for this conversation. I've been, I can say Schumacher College has changed my life deeply. Really, I was already on a trajectory, but the 18 months I spent there between September 2001 and I think March 2003 were really transformative in many ways for me, in terms of the network I connected to, in terms of what I learned, and they really influenced everything that I've done since. So I'm really excited to reconnect with the college and hear how things have gone in with these transformations that we're all now living. But maybe we'll start off by, because you're relatively new to Dartington learning and the college, maybe we'll start off by you telling a little bit how you got to the college and what you found there. But if you could briefly, I just noticed you're on that setting where it blurs the background. I don't exactly know where to
Am I really? Okay, I didn't realize I was. Hold on.
As you're moving, you go blurry.
Oh, well, let's see what I've got here. Didn't think that I was. I turned off my virtual background. Do you know what setting that is? Sorry.
No, I'm actually also a bit of a Luddite with these things. Well, it's okay if you move forward and backward, you shortly go fuzzy, but it doesn't matter. Let's just dive in.
Well, okay. Well, now you got me worried about this. Hold on. Yeah. What about this? Let's try that.
Yeah, that's better.
Okay, good. Well, hopefully you can edit all that out. So.
Unfortunately, because of the financial situation and time, I just trust that raw is real.
It's all in there. Great. So we've got the raw content. Excellent. Well, thank you, Daniel, so much for both reaching out and for inviting me for a conversation. I'm really grateful to, talk with as many members of the extended Schumacher family as I can. And you talked about your connections and network and sort of deep affinity for the college and its influence. And it's a story that I hear all the time, which is really fantastic. Whomever I have a conversation with, whether they've been on a weekend short course, or been there for a summer horticulture residency or master's program, it seems one thing that most people have in common is a deep connection that spans, in your case, decades. And for many people, a similar amount of time, and it's been wonderful to be there. As you said, I'm relatively new, starting in October, and to have conversations with students again who are there for a short time or for the entire year, and see that transformation happen. And that's honestly one of the reasons that I was drawn to Schumacher in the first place. I had been at a small college in Vermont in the U.S. called Sterling College, which is a pretty small, about 100 students, all undergraduate, focused on ecological thinking and community orientation and that sort of thing, with a farm that supports the college, and all of the students participate in community work. So the connections between that pedagogy and Schumacher's are really profound. But what I found at the end of 15 years at Sterling was that I was looking for a place that engaged perhaps more on a global scale, and worked with graduate students and worked with a greater number of students. The students that come in on short courses, for example, have been the last couple of years 500 or 600 students per year. And if I have the opportunity to support a college that has a greater impact that way, then that's really what I was looking for in kind of the next chapter of my own academic leadership, and hopefully teaching. That's on the horizon for me as well at Schumacher. So, it's been it's been a challenging transition. We talked before the conversation here a little bit about anybody coming into a new position this particular year. With the COVID pandemic and the crisis and stuff, the associated financial challenges and impact on higher education generally. It's a particularly challenging time, and I'm happy to talk about how Schumacher is approaching some of those in really, I think, interesting and potentially innovative ways. But initially the transition was fairly comfortable. You know, coming from a higher ed institution that's based on community, where everybody sits in a circle and talks together on a regular basis and eats together. You know, those are, I think, some of the essential facets, essential tenets really of, you know, what I think is a sort of deep holistic learning experience. And, you know, I talk often about, you know, community learning as being the basis of what Schumacher does, and it has been for a long time. And so I'm really focusing a lot of energy on, you know, making sure that that stays as intact as possible, even when students aren't able to be there in person.
Yeah, no, for me, this whole notion, like in the eco-village movement, we called them for a while living and learning centers, of actually where the setting and the community and the rhythms of the community are part of the pedagogy. It's not what you learn in classroom only. It's almost by osmosis. You learn so many other skills and so many other more mindful ways of living in community.
Yes. Absolutely. I mean, I think well, for me, since I'm not in the classroom, you know, or out on field courses or anything like that, you know, my main interaction with students is at meal times. And, you know, I think those are actually, even for students and faculty and staff, some of the most valuable conversations, because those happen, you know, I think Satish would say, you know, some of the most meaningful conversations happen when you're washing up the dishes or when you're emptying the compost. And, you know, that's when the true learning happens. And I think, you know, one thing that Schumacher has that a lot of other universities do not is this sort of spaciousness, really, for having that. It's the time for reflection and for making unique and innovative connections that you might not ordinarily make. You know, intergenerational ones, when we have, you know, students on an eldering short course, for example, you know, have really deep conversations with students who are in an ecological design thinking master's program. And, you know, I think there are networks created and relationships created in those conversations that persist well beyond students' experience at the college.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, I know that the rhythms have been they're slightly less packed than they were when I was there almost 20 years ago during the Masters in Holistic Science, because at that time the Masters was only 4 years old and there was still quite a lot of this relationship building with Plymouth and making sure that we proved that we were an academic course that deserved a Masters in Science. And so in my cohort, we were still heavily over examined. Like, so we had many more essays than they have now. But I felt that because there's all these parallel streams. I mean, in those days there was only one master's, but there were more short courses, and it just created this opportunity to learn that I, as a bit of an omnivore in terms of the intellectual disciplines, I just, it's almost like I felt a intellectual glutton for 18 months. I just I couldn't stop myself. It was slightly overwhelming and it took a while to decelerate from that. But I think it is a wonderful, there's just always something on that is another learning opportunity. Like just if you look at the blackboard or the whiteboard in the entrance hall, and then somebody from another course is offering a short talk, or walk on Dartmoor, or all these other activities that just make it a really rich environment.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, like you said, it's the living and learning together that sort of create the fabric that I think is exactly what students are looking for when they choose a place like Schumacher to do their master's, or, you know, or soon to do a bachelor's, actually.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I was just reflecting on the one thing that has always been a dream of a lot of people is making the actual infrastructure a little bit more like what David Orr calls architecture as pedagogy.
Yep.
And on the one hand, there was something about, or there is something about the old postern as a building that really feels like a sort of alchemical cauldron where transformation happens. But all the accommodation blocks, of course, it would be wonderful to find a philanthropist who says, build the most amazing ecological retrofit that the world has ever seen.
Exactly.
And take these blocks out of the 70s. But it has a certain charm. Most people by now love the blocks because they have that 70s charm.
Well, what's interesting about what you say is that, as you know, the old postern has, not been accessible for, since before I arrived, so well over a year now, because of the challenges to the roof, and we needed to reslate the entire roof. Nobody had done so for about 400 years, apparently. And we were able to get financial support to do that. And work on that began shortly after the first of the year, and then abruptly stopped in March. And I think that I saw some construction workers there just the other day. So I think we're getting back into it. And so hopefully that construction will be done, in the very early months of next year, in time for our 30th anniversary celebration in May of 2021.
Nice.
But what's interesting that, everybody had talked about the old postern, and when I was doing research, about the college before arriving here, almost all of the photographs I could see were of the old postern.
Yeah.
And then I arrived, I said, well, actually, we can't use that building for another, 16, 18 months. And what has struck me is that very quickly, the staff and the students at the college have recreated Schumacher in whatever spaces have been available.
I noticed that when I was there, the last time I was there was in October, when I taught a few days on the Masters in Ecological Design Thinking. And I was sort of dreading going there with not being able to access the postern. And when I arrived and saw the fence around it, my heart was aching. But you're right. In terms of the actual feel, the art set or craft center seems to function just as well to create the...
Right. So in some ways, what that taught me very quickly, and I think a lot of the longer time staff at the college, was that the college isn't necessarily a building at all. And the old postern's a lovely building, but the college is the spirit, and the college is the community, the networks, the relationships, and the pedagogy. And I don't think it really matters where it is, but it can, if it's held as strongly as it is, and the staff really are as passionate as they are, then I think that learning community can be in any space. And I think it is where it is right now because of effectively an emergency that required them to vacate the old postern very quickly. But quite rapidly, I think everybody has settled into other accommodation, other offices, other teaching and learning spaces, which may change again.
What I was more referring to is, like, while I was also surprised how easily the process and the sense, the feeling, the community can continue even without the old postern. It's more the since, like, when I was there 20 years ago, there wasn't as much food grown. All the food was local and organic. It came up from Riverford and so on. But there's been an evolution to even more practice what one preaches. And part of that would have, of course, at some point, it would always be a dream to generate their own renewable energy, really have very efficient eco retrofit buildings, and show what can be done, teaching that you don't have to pull down the old structures. You can retrofit them in a way that makes them much more energy efficient and more beautiful.
Agreed. Yes. Yeah.
But how, because you're also head of Dartington Learning, I think is the title, yeah?
I am. So I think I have the longest title at Dartington, which is head of Schumacher College and interim director of learning for Dartington Hall Trust.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't really fit on a name tag or business card very well. But so I took on the role of director of learning only about, 8-10 weeks ago, as the sort of structure of the directorate of Dartington shifted a little bit. And it struck me that, one, it was a great opportunity to be able to connect, Schumacher's vision with and pedagogy and community learning and everything with other learning initiatives that were happening at Dartington. The art school is the most obvious one of those. We're launching a couple of master's programs this coming year. One, Poetics of Imagination with Martin Shaw and Tracy Warr, and another, Arts in Place, which is going to start in January. And I think as we talked about how we were going to do that, well, one, it naturally increases the number of students who are going to be at Dartington as a whole. And it was really important to me that all of those students have a shared community learning experience. And we don't segregate students in an art school from students at Schumacher, that they're all fully integrated, have meals together, do community work together, have relatively similar experiences, and then also cross-fertilize in ways that I think I've talked about already at meal times and so on, between arts programs and, say, holistic science or regenerative economics, in ways I think that can be really rich. And
No, I mean,
so
that's wonderful, because like when 20 years ago the art school was running completely separate from the college, and I'm actually, that's one thing that I hadn't clocked, so to speak, that the art schools has come back, because I thought that for a while the art school actually moved out of Dartington, didn't it?
It did. And so this is not the same name. It's not the Dartington College of Arts. It's the Dartington School of Arts. But effectively it is a resurgence or a renaissance of the art school's residents, on the estate. We have fantastic facilities in the studio buildings in what's called space, what has been called lower close. We have residential accommodation for, at least 180 students at this point, across the estate. And so as we're looking, doing 3, 4, 5-year plans, looking ahead, we actually anticipate between, 120 to 150 students at all times at Dartington across all of the different learning experiences.
You're making me really happy. Because for a while, it's refreshing to see that kind of vision of bringing the two together and really working with the state as a whole again, because it's just been a long time, this slight dynamic between Dartington, who's always been feeding Schumacher to do its wonderful work in terms of supporting it. A lot of people don't understand that. They look at the prices of Schumacher College and they think, oh, that's elitist, that's too expensive. But I've been on both sides of taking courses and helping to organize them. And from the inside out, it's too cheap. It's impossible to run a college.
Yes, it is.
And in that dynamic, I think people didn't understand that to do the kind of small group intensive with world-class teachers education, even if the teachers also come and don't really earn what they would earn somewhere else, it still is a pretty tight economic game to make it work, and it actually needs philanthropic help. I mean, it's for me, it's an example of that we're really mistaken as a society, culture, and civilization if we think that education needs to wash its own face as a business.
That's right.
Education should be our investment into the future of humanity, into the future of the workforce that will provide for us when we're old. It just shouldn't have to be a business, because the minute it becomes a business, it also teaches differently and in a different way. And I don't think that's what evolves culture.
Well, at the same time, it is a business, unfortunately. Higher education is a very unique and challenging business to be in. And I think part of our approach to that challenge right now is, as with a lot of higher ed institutions, is to diversify the learning offer and portfolio. And to be able to, for me, it's to be able to engage more learners with exactly the kinds of things that we've been talking about, sort of the richness, the transformational learning experiences, the access to networks, access to leading thinkers in the field. And, with this sort of reconnection or, further engagement with Dartington as a whole, we have the opportunity to increase our short courses, for example. The Schumacher short courses that have been really successful over the last several years can now engage, learners in areas such as, craft and visual art and performance and music, and mind-body ecology connections and wellness, and really across the curriculum. And I think that the market is obviously there. Oh, and horticulture and food and farming, which is something we're already doing. And I can talk about that as well. So I would like to talk a little bit about the courses that we're offering now and coming up. And again, in these, it's become cliche to say these are unprecedented times, but they are. And what else are you going to say? I think we have very quickly been able to put together a fairly modest portfolio of things that are accessible to people who are not able to come because we can't have them in residence, for example. You're familiar, I'm sure, with the Joy of Six Earth Talk series that we've been running.
Yeah.
I think this is week 4 of that first series, and we're planning to continue that series. Those have been much more successful than we had anticipated they would be, with about 300 to 400 people attending each one, and staying through the whole thing. And so that's been really great, really positive feedback, and great conversation in the chats and so on.
While we're on that point, it's a completely different project, and I'm sure you've got enough on to fundraise for at the moment.
Yeah.
William, for all those years, the first 20 years of the college, or 15 years until William left as a housekeeper, did all the recording of all the Wednesday evening talks on. I still have about 25 VHS tapes that I now don't have a way to play anymore. And I'm wondering whether there is actually a specific fundraising package that you could relatively quickly prepare to say, in the spirit of Creative Commons and open commons, we will make available this, by now what, 28-year 28-year record of some of the people have passed away since. I mean, there are amazing speakers that are in that,
Absolutely.
and with just a little bit of post-production, like where you kind of put a modern intro and a modern outro of Schumacher and Dartington, and you create a website where people can stream and then donate, and then you have somebody else upload one of them every couple of days to YouTube, and you build your own through putting this vast amount of resource out, build your own YouTube channel. I think it's a nice project that, in comparison, for the reach, the benefit to people, the seeding of valuable information and spreading it, and the benefit in terms of advertising that it would get for the college, I think it's worth doing.
I think you're right. Absolutely. I mean, we have a modest archive already, of ones that have been digitized or that were recorded digitally to begin with, and some work needs to be done on that to package it nicely. It's just kind of sitting on YouTube and various other places. But I think you're right that this would be a great project to jump into. Yeah.
We wanted to get to, because I'm teaching on the MA in Ecological Design Thinking, have done for the last 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
She helped when they first built up the course. To the then director, I suggested that Seton Baxter would be the right person to help launch that course. It's like sometimes even within the college there is a lack of transmission of the historic connections. At the time, nobody knew who Seton Baxter was. When I was there, he was a really important part of the college, and then for a while he was external examiner.
I very much enjoyed my conversations with Seton when he's been there. He's a fantastic gentleman. Yeah.
So let's get into the master's courses, because they all.
Before we do that, Daniel, just one other thing that we're currently doing, and I just wanted to highlight those things. I think they're important. And actually, this one's quite innovative. Is over the last couple of years, we've had really record enrollment in the summer horticulture residency program. And in fact, we increased our enrollment this year in anticipation of having more students than ever in residence. We weren't able to do that, so we launched an online gardening course, which effectively sold out within a week. And it started, I think, not quite a fortnight ago, and it's been quite successful from all the feedback I've heard. About 50 students on this online gardening course, and it is, true to Schumacher form, experiential. And so students engage in gardening in their own home spaces, and then they come back and talk about the experiences that they've had, and talk with Colum, who's our lead grower and who's lead on the course. And I think it's it's a great model and very different from a lot of sort of online gardening courses that are out there. And so that's going to be running for the next 6 months.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people got back into gardening with lockdown and everything. And another Schumacher graduate and close friend to Schumacher, Morak from Crystal Waters.
Mm-hmm.
You know her? She's during lockdown, she created this wonderful series of like every day from her permaculture garden, she would just spend 5 minutes explaining one little trick of home gardening and home permaculture. It's wonderful to hear that you're doing that now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so starting in the autumn, looking at our postgraduate courses, we've been doing all sorts of scenario planning, as everybody has, and there've been, I read the Times Higher Ed supplement on a daily basis to sort of see what the pulse is, and I'm in conversation with colleagues around the world about sort of what the best guesses are as far as, how are we going to be able to engage with our students come September. So we have a number of different scenarios, but the one that we are currently working with is that we are not planning to have students in residence in September, yet we are starting 3 master's programs on September 14th.
Mm-hmm.
So we are planning to deliver the first module entirely online, again, in ways that try to replicate as best as possible the experiential or regenerative learning process of Schumacher in a distance setting. And then the anticipation is that when the second module comes around in November, we'll be able to have at least UK students in residence at the college. And we're making provisions so that international students who may not have the opportunity to travel or may have visa issues can attend virtually for that second half of the first term. And then January, the anticipation in our current model is that we'll be able to have most, if not all, students in residence again. So we are launching 3 courses, 2 at Schumacher and 1 at the art school. So I always talk about all of them together. So Ecological Design Thinking and Regenerative Economics. Regenerative Economics used to be Economics for Transition, and we've made that transition to regenerative. I think it's a more appropriate term in the evolution of the course.
Yeah.
And then Poetics of Imagination at the art school. And all 3 of those are being taught. They were going to be taught originally as low residency programs. And so as we get through these sort of creative first couple of modules, they will get into a rhythm of low residency. And we did that for 2 reasons. One, the principal reason really is to make the courses as accessible as possible to as broad a range of students as possible. And the second is to increase the number of students from the UK who are able to, or enticed to attend Schumacher courses. As I'm sure you're aware, we've had the preponderance of students, the vast majority, have been international students over the last several years. So when I first arrived, and this predates my arrival actually, is we dropped our tuition fees considerably. Some 45% for UK students and 30% for international students. And we've already seen in our applicants and our inquiries this year, a much greater proportion of UK students interested in the courses. And I think that's both because of the tuition drop and because of, they can come for 2 weeks and then go back to their homes or, businesses or other lives for 4 weeks and engage in meaningful experience related to their studies, and then bring that experience back for when they come for the following 2 weeks.
Learning cycle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And all of that is interwoven come January with the other 3 courses that we're launching. And so holistic science will start in January. And we took a hiatus from that this year, but we're launching it again. And
I'm glad to hear that, because for a while, there was this kind of alarming conversation that they might just not run it again. So right. I'm very excited. I think it would have been a huge mistake to drop the rhythm with that. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we have adapted it some and sort of brought it into the more into the 21st century. By adding a couple of modules that engage with sort of more contemporary philosophy and engagement with issues like post-humanism and really creative thinking about the human and more than human connections that can be made through looking at various scientific discourse. And we're running that in parallel, actually, with a new program that Andy Letcher is lead on called Engaged Ecology, which really is, I think, I helped Andy a bit with the development of that program. And I think it really sort of flips even more than the traditional Schumacher program. It flips sort of the embodied experience with the sort of academic one even more on its head, and really foregrounds the idea of making at the very beginning, and engages students in the process of whether it's depending on the season, if we run the course, when we run the course again, whether it's growing their own flax and weaving a garment out of that, and using that as an entry into talking about textiles and talking about agriculture and agroforestry and ecological systems, or if it's carving a spoon in a bowl, the very first week of the course, to engage them in that sort of really tactile process of making that engages them again with conversations about tradition, conversations about the human and more than human connection, and blurring those boundaries. So we're really excited.
I learned bookbinding in my, while I was doing the Masters in Holistic Science. Mary was still up in the craft center doing her bookbinding workshops.
Yep.
I still have a couple of books I made back then.
Yeah, so I'm excited to run those two programs side by side, starting in January. I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting interweaving and collaboration possible there. And those are the two fully residential courses that we're running.
So the Masters in Holistic Science will continue to be fully residential.
Yeah, this time around at least. Yep. And so we're running that straight through till the end of June, which is a slightly different time scale. And I think for the first time, we'll have those students overlapping with the horticulture residency program in a longer way than they have in the past, because typically there's been a couple days or a week or so of overlap in April. But here the students will be here straight through until summer, which will be, I think, a really different experience.
And then they leave, and then they do the thesis, and then the course actually finishes in January?
Sometime at the end of August or something like that, yeah.
So it's a condensed master's, it's not a full year master's then?
Oh, so now I would need to look up the dates to be really specific, so yeah. Check the website.
Yeah, I will, yeah.
All there.
And I mean, so what I'm hearing is that to some extent, the COVID situation only amplified something that was already going on, which is where we need to be less residential and more blended learning and make it more accessible.
Right, absolutely. I look at a lot of sort of higher ed responses to COVID, and a lot of them say, well, we need to decrease our reliance on international students because we're not going to have as many international students, particularly in the UK and the US. That's been a significant issue. And that's something that we addressed, not that we could foresee the future, but something we began to address already a year ago. And so I think we are well positioned, and so far the recruitment has been going, as well as we can be as well as can be expected. And we're looking forward to starting these courses as I've laid out. So I think things are looking fairly good.
One thing that I just suddenly felt compelled to give you a bit of history that you might have not heard of yet, is at some point, it must have been like after I've left Schumacher, a few years later, I moved to Findhorn and lived at the Findhorn Eco Village in Scotland, and ran Findhorn College at the time, and together with the co-director Mari Hollander. And my job was really the designing new master's courses and new collaborations. And one of the projects we were in conversation with Schumacher at the time, Brian Goodwin was the lead on that conversation, was to create, and I still think that would be a wonderful master's course to offer in the UK. In my personal learning, I always say that there were three places that really shaped the basis of my work in the time between 1999 and 2003. And it was basically my time at Schumacher initially, but actually before that I was at the Center for Alternative Technology for a while doing short courses, and then afterwards the Findhorn experience. And I felt that each one of them, while they all have a certain overlap, they have kind of slightly different centers of gravity and strength in terms of what they teach. And so in those like in 2008, 2009, there was this conversation of working with St. Andrews as the certifying university, and then have a course where the students would spend a sort of induction at St. Andrews. And then they would have 3 residential modules, one at Schumacher, one at CAT, and one at Findhorn. And I still think that would, I mean, it's a lot of bringing a lot of different organizations under one hat, but it would be a powerful course to
It would be, and I think that's one of the lessons that people are learning from our current situation as well, that a lot of networking and collaboration is almost going to be necessary to move forward and to create learning experiences for, I think postgraduate largely, but also I think undergraduate students if possible. And a lot of these international collaborations and sort of international university partnerships are becoming more and more popular to talk about, as being alternatives and being potential ways to, if not preserve higher education, I don't think that's what anybody's looking to do, but to, I think, evolve higher education in directions I think that it needs to go, given our current situation. And a lot of that just makes sense.
But one thing that I think Schumacher has already played a bit of a role in is this, to my mind, we need to really reinvent education from the ground up as a lifelong journey, rather than as something that you do in the first third of your life and then you make some money with it and then you retire. and because of the offer that Schumacher has, traditionally you've always had a blend of young students and very mature students who might have even, like some of them after retirement, some of them in a change of career, dropping out of the rat race and wanting to refocus. And I think that's, we need to create international partnerships of organizations that provide different types of vocational and not formal and informal learning programs, and somehow bring them together into a collaborative, not one meta organization, but a network of organizations that would enable to basically the Greta Thunberg generation, when the world is changing so fast that to do a traditional degree is a waste of money and time to some extent. And I've always been dreaming of this idea that all these leaders in alternative education or ecological holistic awareness education would come together with all the grassroots institutions of like the global permaculture training webs, like networks, and the agroforestry people, and now ecosystems restoration camps as sites where you could do practical learning, and create this system where students can build their own 4-year journey. And Eduard Müller from the University of International Cooperation in Costa Rica gave me this other piece in this puzzle, because he was thinking of something very similar. And he said, yeah, I agree with you. And I had this idea that people would have a passport. And basically the students would build their own program, take these different courses. Some of them would be online, so you could maybe do a Gaia Education Design for Sustainability course while you're working in an ecosystems restoration camp, because they work together. And then each organization stamps X units, and all you'd have to do is validate the different units against each other. So after in the complexity after 4 years, then everybody together certifies. And that would, to my mind, it would create graduates that might have done a nonviolent communication and a sociocracy training and a agroforestry training, and then spent some time at Schumacher doing a master's or a couple of residential courses. And I think they would be so much more employable and so much more multi-skilled and full human development than normal academic courses.
Well, I think you're right. And those are exactly some of the conversations that we're having. It speaks to experience that I've had back in the States of working on bioregional higher education networks, in the Northeast, for example, looking at, I think there were some 28 or 30 universities in the Northeastern US in what we call the Northern Forest region, but it's contiguous boreal forest transition zone. And it worked well to think about that as sort of a unified bioregion because of its sort of cultural, economic, ecological, interconnections. And I think exactly what you're describing could happen anywhere in the world. And I quite like the bioregional model because it emphasizes all of the sort of interconnections that I think Schumacher sees as being essential between human and more than human communities and so on. And I think the impediments to something like that are obviously vast. Particularly as we're talking about international partnerships and cooperation and validation and so on. But I think that it's really essential as we move forward in even the next couple of years, and certainly over the 5 and 10 year horizon, that higher education absolutely has tremendous challenges about regarding access, regarding sort of equity, regarding sort of shared experience of students, and whether or not we're providing sort of you can't really talk about higher education universally, but whether higher education is providing students with the experiences that they actually need or that are useful for them or in fact what they're looking for. So I think there need to be all sorts of flexible opportunities. I think the intergenerational one is really essential. I think Schumacher does that quite well. I think we could potentially integrate even more of that into sort of living and learning communities that might be intergenerational. I think there are incredible opportunities, and now is really the time to begin having those conversations.
Yeah, and I think that because so many institutions like Schumacher, for example, is now at an age, they're now at an age where they've created their own track record. It's not like in the beginning, it was this experimental, innovative educational institute that really had to kind of look up to a certifying university and almost beg them to get onto the books. And now I think it's the other way around almost. The world's moved on to the point that more and more people and more employers also very clearly say university degrees, many people have them now. They don't speak to us. I want to see something slightly different here. And so I think the big opportunity is that Gaia Education also has a long track record now, and Gaia University and all these, the network. Are you connected to the Ecoversities network that is building?
Only informally,
yeah. There are a lot of players that were considered very unconventional and maybe by some universities not proper universities. And I feel now the first mover advantage will be to not even try to get certified by these national systems, to just have the confidence to say we together as a body of organizations that have together lots of track record, say this is a great educational program that this person has gone through, and we can vouch for the quality of their abilities.
Right, exactly. It's the same as sort of creating a certificate program effectively and saying that you've completed this course at Schumacher, and to a lot of people that means a lot. It doesn't necessarily have to be an official degree, and that's one of the reasons that we have increased the number of short courses that we're offering, because that seems like a sort of tangible way and a fairly accessible way for a lot of students to be able to experience the type of learning that we offer in different areas. And it's sort of easy and relatively low risk for us to offer. We don't need to partner with another organization. And we can sort of create really accessible content for people.
Just very briefly, I wanted to come back to the bioregion thing, because that's like what I've noticed in my work. I spend a lot of time focused on community scale, so how to build sustainable communities. I've written most of the curriculum for Gaia Education's Design for Sustainability course, which was really initially the online version of the Eco-Village Design Education program focused on building sustainable communities. And then also lots of work with the different transition towns up at Forest. And I realized that while community is centrally important, to really create a regenerative system that includes the diversity of human expression and also needs, you really have to do the whole systems design at the bioregional scale. The community scale is just too small. And what's happened in the I mean, you're from the US, and there are pockets, the Vermont area being one, and sort of Arkansas area another, and over near Cascadia on the West Coast, there are pockets of strong bioregional initiatives.
Yeah.
That some of them go back by now 50 years. But in the last 5 or 10 years, I feel lots of organizations are converging on understanding that this transformation of the human presence on Earth that we now have to do in the next 3 decades in order to respond to the biophysical reality of living on planet Earth needs a re-inhabitation at the bioregional scale. It needs matching human patterns back to the biophysical landscape. And I mean, with Isabella Carlisle's wonderful Bioregional Learning Center, you've got a great partner near in Devon. But I moved to Mallorca 10 years ago because islands to me are great case studies for bioregional education. And and at some other point we should have a conversation about this, how to empower this learning journey of people in place to go on a journey of understanding their bioregion, doing the research, multidisciplinary, of mapping, almost in a sort of Gedesian and Ian McHarg type way, what they're working with, and understanding both the challenges and opportunities in their region. I don't know if you've had time to read my book, but my work is very focused on questions rather than solutions and answers. And I think there's a huge opportunity to develop a bioregional program that engages people in mapping the bioregion and then in their bioregion. And then the next year, people from the same bioregion take the map that the previous cohort developed and improve upon it. And every year you build more and more of a cohort in a region of people who've done part of that mapping together. And that would be a transformational process in and of itself, enabling this so necessary re-inhabitation process of us becoming re-indigenized again to the places we draw sustenance from.
It seems like you're proposing to teach a new course here.
Well, probably not, because I know the finances of how to what you get paid to develop a course like that. But it's more, I would love to have a conversation on what kind of team could co-create that course. That would be interesting.
That would be good.
But anyway, before we end, because I know you've got to go soon, in terms of people engaging with the master's programs, how much longer are they? Are the enrollments open for those?
So our first deadline is June 1st. And we're going to keep enrollment open after that. But I think for priority, decisions, people want to get their applications in by the 1st of June. And that also, if there are any applications for bursary requests, that's also the same deadline. So certainly we'll keep, accepting applications after that point. But so coming up pretty soon.
Wow. Okay. And they're filling well. So you.
They're filling reasonably well. Yeah. So I would encourage anybody who's reading or listening or watching this to get their applications in. And there's a different application deadline, of course, for the January start courses. So holistic science, engaged ecology, and arts in place. And that's going to be, I'm guessing, but later in the year, September or October would be the deadline for those. Yeah.
And in terms of this wonderful, like, I'm excited to hear this news of the art school and the new programs, undergraduate programs, and bringing the whole estate more together. I mean, this long journey of Dartington estate selling off assets outside of the estate and shrinking down to the core estate over the last, since it started.
Over the last 40 years, really. Yeah.
How are they doing? Is there a need for, if any well-meaning philanthropists listening to this? I sense that there's still quite a economic need to finance this.
Well, I think there always is, and as you described yourself, higher education specifically itself isn't necessarily a massive revenue-generating enterprise. So we're devoting. Dartington is a mission-driven organization, as is Schumacher, and Dartington has recently reinvented itself as a center for learning. And so if everything at the estate is in support of the type of learning that happens at Schumacher, then I think we're going to see fantastic things in the coming years in terms of, lots of opportunities to use the resources of the estate for Schumacher courses and for the art school courses and short courses and so on. All of the buildings, all of the spaces, a lot of greater engagement with the land. We are launching a master's in regenerative food farming and enterprise next autumn, as well as a BSc in sustainable food and farming. So really actively engaging with that. As we increase the number of students, we're looking to increase the production of the farm. So right now we produce about 50% of all the veg we consume at the college. And my hope is to keep it at that 50% level as we continue to move forward. And that's a significant investment as well. So I think there's a refocusing that's happening at Dartington to really emphasize these core purposes of really focusing on social justice, on community, on ecology, on arts, all under the rubric of learning. And it's a really exciting time to be thinking about, well, let's look at this estate and how we can use all of these resources to help support what's going on. So
and what it really is amazing. I mean, just to drop a couple of ideas here. One thought would be partnerships with ecosystems restoration camps in the Netherlands, because they've increasingly experimenting with these pop-up ecosystem restoration camps, and Dartington could just, like, if you wanted to develop one particular field into a different type of production, you could actually use a 4-week or 6-week ecosystems restoration camp partnership with the foundation, because I'm on the advisory council of the foundation. That's why I'm trying to weave possible collaborations here. I think it could be a really interesting opportunity to bring
I think you're right.
people and build that partnership. The other partnership that could be interesting is since you now renamed Jonathan's master's to Regenerative Economics, I'm assuming that you're probably reaching out to John Fullerton. I know Kate Rayworth is already teaching on it. And the whole Regenerative Communities Network that was born out of the Capital Institute has a strong bioregional focus and has very interesting groups in the US, one in Vermont, one in the Hudson Valley, but also in Costa Rica and in other places in the world. And I think there's like that bioregional program we just talked about. There could be a really interesting partnership between the Capital Institute and the college on not just developing something for Devon, but something that could actually possibly be associated with both of those institutions, but offer on the ground blended learning in bioregional.
Like the international learning networks that we were talking about. So I apologize, Daniel, but I really do need to go to my next thing. But thank you so much for the thanks so much for the conversation. I very much appreciate it.
Well, I'm deeply grateful to the college for the influence it had on me, and so I know advertising it and getting more people to come to the college can only help transform the world positively, because I see what it did to me. So
absolutely.
Thank you
I appreciate the help. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.